All right. So thank you again for being here. In the last lecture, we talked about the age of exploration and the motivation behind it. Originally, of course, the established European powers wanted to establish direct trade routes to Asia. And of course, it was during that period that Christopher Columbus thought that he could reach Asia by sailing west, and then he would end up in the east. Of course, he miscalculated in the sense that he didn't really have any way of knowing just how large the circumference of the Earth is. And of course, it didn't seem to occur to him that there might be other land masses that might get in the way between Europe and Asia. But the reality is that the age of exploration was largely motivated by self-interest. The people who made this happen were very ruthless in very many ways. And they were businessmen, largely in search of glory and wealth and fame. In Columbus's case, of course, he wanted all of that plus a title. And one of the reasons for a reevaluation of his legacy is that he opened the door to many things that came later. Certainly, Columbus was brutal in the manner by which he, administered the island in the Caribbean that he claimed for Spain. Europeans generally were interested in their own self-interest, and they weren't really all that concerned with how what they were doing was going to impact the native populations they encountered. I mean, it's that simple, really. And then, of course, other exploration followed. The major European powers, in this case, I'm speaking about Spain and Portugal first, and then later England and France, when they reached what they called the New World, they did it because they wanted profit from it. This is a world where land equals wealth, where land equals power. And when you think about it, one of the ways that these European powers hoped to gain additional wealth and power through trade with Asia was that if you bring back home trade goods that are not available domestically and people want them, silk, spices, tea, porcelain, things like that, there's certainly money to be made. So what happens is that it creates a cycle where European powers want control over more lands, and the resources from those lands give them wealth, which they can then use to increase their own power, defend themselves against their rivals, and then acquire control over additional lands. Now, in the case of what the Europeans called the New World, certainly they wanted gold and silver or whatever other precious metals or gems they could find. But they also wanted to find other ways that they could make some money here. So they did. Think about food products that we consume today that Europeans had never seen before, that were not indigenous to Europe. For example, the Spanish, when Cortez took down the Aztec Empire, he was exposed to cocoa, basically chocolate. And just imagine what it would be like to be an adult if you've never tasted chocolate before. And of course, once chocolate became a commodity that could be imported back to Europe, cocoa beans were literally worth their weight in gold. And then, of course, other products followed. Tobacco, for example, very quickly became a very profitable item. Indigo, which is used for dyeing cloth, sugarcane, all of these things became as desirable to people in Europe as, say, peppercorns or nutmeg, for example. So, it's about making money. And then later on, of course, you'll see, cotton will be grown in what is the American South. So there's money here. I mean, people in Europe, they never knew what potatoes were, or tomatoes, or corn. Food items that most of us eat on a regular basis were, foreign to people in Europe. So of course they wanted these things, especially, I mean, chocolate and sugar and tobacco. I would say in the early days of colonization, those items were worth a fortune. I mean, just imagine that you're heading into the 17th century and you can return from the Caribbean back to Spain or Portugal with a ship filled with cocoa beans or with sugar cane or tobacco. I mean, there's some money to be made there. So that's the name of the game, and I think it's a fair criticism of myself to say that my opinion of humanity is not necessarily an overly positive one. I think that people do what's good for them often, especially if there's profit in it. And I think it is true today, and I think it was true then. Later on, of course, we're going to be talking more about the slave trade. I think most of us would agree that slavery is an evil thing. It is an abomination. Well, if it's so evil and it's so terrible, then why does it exist today? We simply call it human trafficking. And what it shows you is that whether you're taking slaves from Africa and you're bringing them to the New World on a slave ship, or whether you are taking men, women, and children today and allowing them to become victims of human trafficking where they are bought and sold like cattle, at the end of the day, what they have in common is that there are people who are willing to do this because they can make money doing it, and they really just don't give a damn about the moral implications of it or the pain and suffering that they are causing. And that is a horrible thing to have to say, but I think the power of self-interest and what money can do to people is it's rather shocking. Um, I often play a game sometimes with my friends. We'll get together and we'll have a few beers, and one of us will come out with an outrageous statement and say, "Well, how much money would it take for you to do whatever?" And then, would you do this, for $5,000? Would you do this for $1 million? And you play. I'm sure some of you may have done that. Uh, I'm not against money. I wish I had a lot more of it. But at the same time, when it motivates people to engage in conduct that is harmful to innocent people, it's unacceptable, but yet it happens. So this period that I'm describing here is brutal. I mean, in all fairness, I mean, do you really think that any of these European explorers and conquerors, conquistadores, the Spanish conquistadors, I mean, do you really think that any of them really gave a damn about how what they were doing was impacting the native population? Do you really think Columbus was going to reach land and say, "Oh, I didn't know anybody was living here. I'm so sorry. Let me stay for a while and fill up my ship with food and water, and I'm going to go home"? That's not the way this worked. Uh, and so that's one of the reasons why the legacy of Columbus has been sort of reevaluated, because he sort of opened the door to European conquest of the New World, North America, South America, Central America, the Caribbean. And then, of course, what came later, the decimation of indigenous people, and then later, of course, the use of slave labor and the transatlantic slave trade. So, Europe during that period was becoming increasingly popular. They're basically on their way to basically dominating most of the globe. It's, this is a process that begins during this period. And, while they are becoming more powerful and enriching themselves, Native American populations are being destroyed. And later on, we're going to see the introduction of a slave trade that will go on for centuries. So, this is as ruthless as it gets. And there's no real way, I think, to sugarcoat it, nor should it be. So that's my take on this. I'm very proud to, be an American and to live in the United States. But at the same time, if we're going to talk about the positive elements of history, we cannot ignore the negative ones. And I think there has to be a balance here. We cannot limit ourselves only to what we want to see. I believe that firmly. Um, I want to take a moment and talk about the downfall of the Aztec Empire. Um, I don't know about you. I have this sort of like love-hate relationship with some of these famous people in history. On one level, I look at their accomplishments and I think to myself, "Whoa, that's extraordinary. I can't believe that they did that." And on another level, I'm sort of like disgusted, and I say to myself, "Whoa, I can't believe they did that." Um, and I don't know what it is, but for some reason, I think human beings have a natural, uh, how can I put it? A natural attraction for people who are successful in war or combat, conquest. I remember years ago, I was doing world history, and at that time we were on campus and I would have students do presentations. And there were these two girls who were working as a team, and they were doing a presentation about Napoleon Bonaparte. And I mean, they were just beaming with pleasure as they described his brilliance and his conquests, and what an excellent military commander he was, and how he seized power and became the Emperor of France, and how he went on to conquer most of Europe. And as they were describing him, they did so in a way where they almost, represented an attraction to the guy. And I said to them, I said, "Well, what about all the people who died during the Napoleonic Wars? What about all the people who died when France tried to conquer Spain?" And then they're like, "Oh, well, yeah, that's true." Um, for whatever reason, it's human nature. We're just attracted to people who kick butt. Even if you're watching, why do you think we like sports? You're watching a football game and there's a tackle made where the defensive player takes out the quarterback, or the receiver gets hammered, and the bigger the hit, the more the crowd cheers. you know uh there's just something about the idea of having power to impose your will that human beings find attractive. When you look at Hernan Cortez, he's an interesting guy. I mean, I've often said that if I ever become super wealthy, which is unlikely to happen, but if it does, my fantasy, here's the history teacher fantasy. No offense to Grossmont College, but I'm going to quit Grossmont College, and I'm going to become a movie producer of historically accurate epic films. And one of the films I would do is the conquest of the Aztecs by Cortez. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, here's this guy who shows up with a relatively small group of men. He lands off the coast of Mexico, and he makes up his mind, I'm going to conquer this land. So once his men get to shore, he has his own ships burned. And he says to his men, there is no going back. There is no retreat. We are going to succeed in this or we will die, but there's no escape. We will win or we will die. That's it. And part of me thinks to myself, wow, isn't that something? And then another part of me thinks like, oh my God, this guy is just crazy. And like, who does that? But in the end, it worked for him. And then, of course, he is working his way up through modern day Mexico with his men. And he encounters this, Native American woman named Malinche. And if any of you know anything about Mexican culture or Mexican history, she is sort of like the evil villain of the story. She I mean, I never met the woman, but from the descriptions, she apparently was rather attractive, and she thought Cortez was a man of great power. And I guess, she became his girlfriend, I suppose, and she was going to serve as a guide and an interpreter to help him in his conquest. I mean, so the story has everything, you know, it has, and then of course, the king of the Aztecs, Montezuma. I mean, he and his people, they encounter the Spanish, and they don't even know what to make of Cortez. I mean, they had never seen ships like that before when he first landed. They had never seen horses before. Here you have, these Spaniards riding horses, and they have armor, and they have these strange weapons. It's almost like an episode out of Star Trek where, they beam down to a new planet. And here are these strange people with these strange weapons and strange animals. It was literally a meeting of two totally different worlds. I mean, just imagine how extraordinary that is. And then here's another twist to the story. The Aztecs had prophesized that their ancient god king, and I don't know, I still don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Quetzalcoatl. And they had prophesied that he was due to return. And it just so happened that's the year that Cortez showed up. So at first, the Aztecs are welcoming to Cortez. I mean, they could have taken him out and his men immediately. And who knows how the history of the world would be. But they don't. So instead, Cortez and his men are welcomed into the city, which is where modern day Mexico City is. And of course, it was an extraordinary city. No one had ever seen anything like it. At least the Spanish had never seen anything like it. Very advanced, very sophisticated. They must have been in awe of this. By the time the Aztecs realize that Cortez is a threat, it's too late. Just like the story of the Trojan horse, they're in the walls now. They've been let in. And unknowingly to the Aztecs, the Spanish were carriers of infectious disease, like smallpox, for example. People started to get sick. They're confined within the city walls. And of course, there's a battle between the Spanish and the Aztecs. And the Spanish have a very big advantage. They have now introduced infectious disease to the population, which weakens them greatly and makes them less able to defend themselves. They also have armor, they have horses, they have gunpowder, they have cannons and guns. So at the end of the day, the Aztecs fall. It's one of those extraordinary moments in world history. It's also worth pointing out, the Aztecs themselves, they didn't get to be number one because they were nice. They were utterly ruthless and brutal to their surrounding neighbors. So Cortez actually was able to recruit other, indigenous tribes as allies to fight the Aztecs. Of course, what these different groups didn't realize is that once Cortez didn't need them anymore, he was going to do the same thing to them. So, that's quite a story. I think it would make a great film. It's sort of like almost like a combination of like Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings, and it has everything but the dragons. And so I think I would love to see a film that tells that story, filmed in the way that the Lord of the Rings trilogy was done. With these big epic landscapes and battles, and it's got everything really. It has fighting and it has drama, and of course, the king of the Aztecs, Montezuma, was killed. There is some dispute whether or not he was killed by his own people who blamed him for this and turned on him, or whether the Spanish did it, but he was killed. And the city fell, and modern day Mexico became, part of the growing Spanish Empire. That's quite a story. So, that's part of the ruthlessness and the brutality of Cortez. I mean, I'm attracted to him as as a historical figure because what he did was extraordinary, and he certainly showed no fear. I mean, he was basically, ruthless and successful. The flip side of that, of course, is, I mean, he took down the Aztecs and, of course, established what would later become Spanish control over what is modern day Mexico. I mean, Spain is going to control Mexico until 1821, or I don't know, I think it was 1821 or 23 that Mexico became independent from Spain. And this story is going to be repeated. So you've got Cortez taking down the Aztecs. You've got Francisco Pizarro taking down the Incas. And this happened with lightning speed. I mean, Columbus, goes on his first journey at the end of the 15th century. And within 100 years, much of South and Central America is under European control. It's extraordinary. So that is what I have to say about that. Now, while this is going on, it's not like everything back in Europe was great. They had their problems. This is also a period where we see religious conflict developing. In Central and Western Europe, for centuries, the Catholic Church was the only official sanctioned, acceptable church. In other words, to be Christian was to be Catholic. And this was true throughout modern day Italy, Portugal, Spain, France, England, and much of what is now Germany. Well, we end up with a situation in the early 16th century. So Columbus is 1492, right? 1517 is when a German monk named Martin Luther challenges the practices of the Catholic Church. He publishes his essay known as the 95 Theses, where he basically makes a list of issues within the Catholic Church that need to be reformed. Well, let's just say that the powers that be in Rome did not take kindly to Martin Luther. They did not consider what he was doing a positive critique. They were not open for his suggestions. So in the end, he was excommunicated. But what you have to understand is that many of these German kingdoms, for a while now, they had sort of been looking for their opportunity to break from the Church of Rome because they didn't like the idea that they didn't have absolute power over their lands because they still had to sort of follow what the church told them to do. One of the reasons I think why Martin Luther survived is that he ended up with very powerful friends. You didn't get away with challenging the authority of the church. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again, that throughout history, no matter what religion you're describing, there has always been a relationship between the power of the religious institution and the power of the government, that they tend to mutually reinforce each other. And there's a reason, for example, why Spain during this period became a leader in the Spanish Inquisition. They were not going to have any rival for the Catholic Church in Spain. Protestants were looked upon as heretics, and they were imprisoned, expelled, killed. Jews and Muslims were certainly not welcome, and they were either going to have to convert or basically die. It was a ruthless, brutal period. But the religious conflict that develops has a side effect, just like today, people who wanted to escape it or who felt that their lives were in danger sought refuge in the New World. I mean, if you're living in Spain, for example, and you're Jewish, and you're either going to have to convert to Catholicism or be imprisoned or killed, maybe you decide to, get on a boat and establish a community for yourself in the New World. So there are going to be people then and now who will leave where they are because their religious beliefs make them a target. Um, Certainly in East County, San Diego, we have a large Chaldean population. They are from Iraq. They are Christian. Um, they didn't necessarily leave Iraq because they wanted to come to El Cajon for the weather. They left because they felt that their religion made them a potential target, and they wanted to live somewhere where they could practice their religion freely. People have been coming to what the Europeans called the New World for centuries for similar reasons. Later on next week, we'll talk about the Pilgrims who went on their journey in 1620. They wanted to establish a community where they could practice their religion in their own way. So that has been religion has been a motivating factor. And as I've said before, none of us are indigenous to this land unless you are American Indian, or if you prefer to say indigenous or Native American. I mean, every one of us, if we did a DNA test, our ancestors are not from North America or South America, unless you have native, DNA somewhere in your family history. So what that means, as I said before, is that everyone who is in America today, their ancestors either were driven out by persecution or war, or they left simply because they thought they could do better economically, or their ancestors were brought here forcibly against their will, which of course is my reference to slavery. But the bottom line is, as I said before, I'm speaking English to you. I've never been there. The dominant languages in the New World are not indigenous languages. The main language of Mexico is not Aztec. It's Spanish. So it tells you how this went down. I would like you to be aware of Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation. For those of you who are Christian but not Catholic, Martin Luther, in a way, kind of opened that door. He established the idea that you did not necessarily have to be a Catholic in order to worship Christ. And of course, today, I mean, there are people all over the world who worship Christ and who identify as Christian, but are they all a part of the same church? I mean, if I were to take a poll and find out how many of you, believe in Jesus, are you all members of the same church? Do you all pray and worship in exactly the same way? Probably not. So prior to Martin Luther, the Catholic Church had a monopoly on Christianity in Central and Western Europe. I'm not going to talk about Eastern Europe, where you had the Greek Orthodox Church and the Russian Church. That's a topic of a different class. But in terms of Central and Western Europe, the Catholic Church was it until Martin Luther opened that door. And then, of course, the Bible was translated from Latin into native languages so that people could read the Bible for themselves in their own languages. And this was a revolution in religious thought, but it also created horrible religious conflicts. In the 17th century, there's a period called the 30 Years' War, where you basically have, kingdoms and nations fighting each other over, religious dominance. What do you do if you're a Catholic and your ruling prince decides to convert to Protestantism, or vice versa? This was a major problem for people, and a lot of people were persecuted and killed because of it. So, of course, nobody gets persecuted today because of their religion, right? I'm going to say something, and I really want you to think about this. There is not a single topic, not one, that you are going to learn about in this class with me or read in your book that does not have a modern day equivalent. Think about it. People during this period were often victims of religious persecution and would leave or try to escape where they were to avoid religious persecution. People do that today. When we talk about the slave trade, you have the brutality of men, women, and children being captured and sold into slavery. Well, human trafficking is one of the largest illegal economies in the world today. So maybe the modern world isn't as modern as you think it is. I mean, do you really think that just because we're taking classes online using Zoom and you have iPhones, that we are more morally sophisticated and superior to our ancestors? You think people back then didn't like making money? I mean, I often think of some of these explorers. I mean, look at, for example, Jeff Bezos, who created Amazon. What did he do? He found a new way to connect the customer to the product, right? You want to get a product, you go online, you order it. Hopefully, you get a cheap price, and the product is delivered to you. So how does Amazon make money? They connect the customer to the product. Well, what do you think these explorers were trying to do? I mean, in the end, the concept's the same, isn't it? There's money to be made. If people in Europe are going to buy whether it's peppercorns or cocoa beans or sugar cane or fish or tobacco, it's all about connecting the product to the customer and making a profit doing it. So at the end of the day, I mean, are we really all that different? I don't see it. I think the names, dates, and places have changed, but I think that the reason why people do what they do has not changed. That's my personal view, and as I said earlier, you are more than welcome to disagree, because it is not my job to teach you what to think. It is my job to help you learn to think for yourself. All right, moving along. By the way, I'm not entirely a fan of Martin Luther because he was anti-Semitic and didn't like Jewish people. And there's a long history of that in Germany, which ultimately, well, we'll learn about World War II another day. But even people who are famous often have problems associated to them as well. Getting back to the discussion, England becomes the first major European power to break with the Catholic Church. And there is no better illustration of the relationship between religion and politics than good old Henry VIII. I mean, this guy, the King of England, I mean, he was made for like television movies and dramas. I mean, his whole life was one big soap opera. I mean, here's a guy, he's King of England, right? And I'll just tell you this, old Henry liked to party, all right? He liked to eat and drink and hang out with his boys and chase after women. And he basically, said to himself, hey, I'm the king, I'm going to enjoy this position. And he is a very good example of a king who says, I'm the king. That means I can do whatever I want, and I'm going to do it. And of course, he ended up being married 6 times. He got rid of 2 of his wives, had their heads chopped off. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. You don't need to make it up. I mean, it's dramatic and crazy on its own. You don't have to add a thing. So what is the connection to history for us? Well, Henry was married to a princess of Spain. His first wife was Catherine, and she was a daughter of the famous Ferdinand and Isabella, who helped unite Spain as a nation state. And of course, in those days, royalty marries royalty. And it is often done for political and strategic reasons. So, if I'm the King of England and, Ethan, you are my son, and I can marry you off to a Spanish princess or a French princess, then, I'm doing it to make an alliance. I'm doing it for political reasons as well. So Henry is married to Catherine, and but they don't have a son. And Henry, to be honest with you, today we would very much describe him as a sexist. He does not believe that a woman can rule, and he has a daughter, Mary, but no son, and he is very upset about that. And Catherine reaches the point where she is reaching an age where the childbearing years are coming to an end. And Henry wants to get rid of her. He wants to trade her in for a younger model. Well, the Catholic Church does not permit divorce. And you don't exactly throw away a wife who was also a princess of Spain when, her family, she's related to, the King of Spain. You don't just throw her away without there being consequences. Henry didn't care. He just didn't care. And when the Catholic Church would not grant him permission to divorce his wife, he said, well, then I'm going to leave the church and I'll start a new church called the Church of England. And who can I put in charge of the Church of England? Let's see, who can I trust? I know, myself. So he starts the Church of England, makes himself head of the church, and boy, does he consolidate his power. Anyone who was in the Catholic establishment during that time, if they didn't go along with this, they were going to get crushed. I mean, he went after those Catholic monasteries. This is Henry VIII. He went after those Catholic monasteries. He confiscated all of their land, all of their wealth. Any members of the clergy who opposed him, he had them imprisoned or executed. This is a power grab of stunning proportion. Now, is he making enemies? Yeah. He is now making an enemy of the Pope. He is now making an enemy of the King of Spain. He didn't care. His attitude was, I'm the king, and in my kingdom, I'm going to do what I want. And I am not going to share my power with any church. And so he consolidated his power. He marries this young woman named Anne Boleyn. And Anne Boleyn gets pregnant and gives him a daughter. And Henry wasn't pleased. And eventually he got tired of her and said, you know what, I think I want to get rid of her and try again with another woman. So he had false charges, thrown at her that she had committed adultery and even worse. And he didn't worry about divorcing wife number 2. He just had her found guilty of bogus crimes and had her head chopped off. Then he married wife number 3, who gave him a son, so he was happy. But wife number 3, Jane Seymour, died in childbirth. So Henry got the son that he wanted, but lost the wife. And he married again. I always get 4 and 5 confused. He married this one woman, Anne of Cleves, and she was a German princess. Germany was becoming Protestant by that point. So it was suggested you should marry a German princess to make a Protestant alliance between England and the German kingdoms. But when she showed up, and they didn't have Instagram in those days, and no Facebook. He sent his artist to paint a portrait of her, and the artist sort of was like, oh, I don't know. So the artist sort of made her look better, apparently, than she really did. And when Henry met her in person, he was not all that attracted to her. Let's put it that way. So that marriage did not survive. He also married Anne Boleyn, remember wife number 2. He married her cousin, Catherine Howard, and she was much younger than him. By that point, Henry became big and fat, and even fatter than me, if you can believe it. And he had become an older man, and without getting into the details, Henry became a little too, let's just say that some of his manly function was in decline. And this new wife, wanting to enjoy her youth, was seeking her pleasure elsewhere. which was a pretty dumb thing to do. And of course, she got caught, and Henry had her head chopped off too. By the way, I forgot to mention Anne Boleyn, wife number 2. Before Henry was with her, Henry had an affair with her sister and got her pregnant. So he was, well, let's just put it this way. When you're the king and you want to have a good time with a lady, if you're the king, it's hard for the lady to say no. And Henry also fathered illegitimate children outside of marriage. He liked to indulge himself in food and recreation and chasing women. And so Henry had an affair with Anne Boleyn's sister, but didn't marry her. And then he married Anne Boleyn, and then she gave him a daughter, and then later Henry got rid of her and had her head chopped off. And then Henry married Anne Boleyn's cousin, Catherine Parr, and then she fooled around because Henry was getting older and unable to satisfy her needs. And then he had her head chopped off. And then in the end, he married his last wife, was Catherine Parr. And by that point, he was in failing health, and she became more of a nurse to him and a companion than anything else. And she survived him, and he died. He did have a son, but the son didn't live to adulthood. He ended up becoming sick and dying young. And the throne then went to his daughter from his first marriage, Mary, who was pretty pissed off about everything that happened. And she decided, I'm going to turn England Catholic again. So what that meant was that anybody who was Protestant was now going to be on the chopping block. So now England is tearing itself apart because Henry wants to make England go from Catholic to Protestant. And then daughter Mary from the first marriage, who was really pissed off about everything that happened, wants to make England Catholic again. And then she dies childless. And then the throne goes to her half sister, Elizabeth, from wife number 2. And Elizabeth basically just wants to rule in peace and stability. And she wants England to be Protestant, but she's more tolerant. Her attitude basically is, I want England to be a Protestant country, but if a person wants to worship the Catholic religion, so long as they do it peacefully and they don't threaten my rule or authority, I can live with that. But she constantly had plots and threats against her. So here is where the story takes another turn. Elizabeth has a cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots, who is Catholic. And the Catholic powers in Europe, what I'm speaking here mostly of Spain and of course the Pope, I mean, they're just dying to get rid of Elizabeth and put Mary, Queen of Scots, on the throne. Mary, Queen of Scots, was accused of a plot to overthrow Elizabeth. There is some dispute and debate about like how involved was she in this? Was she really a part of it, or was she just a pawn? But to make a long story short, Elizabeth finds out that her cousin is a threat. So Elizabeth orders the execution of her cousin, and Mary, Queen of Scots, has her head chopped off. Now, Elizabeth never married. She's known as the Virgin Queen. She was a woman who had no desire to share power with any man, but she never produced an heir to the throne. By the way, it's during this period that the British are now engaged in exploration of their own, and they are trying to colonize in the New World. In 1587, there is an attempt to establish a colony in the Chesapeake Bay area called Roanoke. That colony is going to disappear under mysterious circumstances. Later, after Elizabeth dies in 1607, the British are going to try again and establish the Jamestown colony. Elizabeth dies and doesn't have an heir. So the throne goes to the son of the woman Elizabeth killed, Mary, Queen of Scots. And he becomes King James of England. So this is a messed up family. You think your family's got problems? How's this for a family with problems? Just imagine that your father orders the beheading of your mother, then you become the ruler, and then you order the beheading of your cousin, who you think is a threat, but then you die, and the child of the cousin that you executed then takes over the throne once you're gone. So you want to talk about family problems. I mean, it's too bad they didn't have marriage and family therapy back then. They could have used it. So what does this have to do with American history? In 1587, the British attempted and failed to establish a colony called Roanoke. Now, after Mary, Queen of Scots was murdered, or well, executed, beheaded, if she was found guilty of treason against Elizabeth, after she is executed, King Philip of Spain decides, I've had enough of Elizabeth. I want to get rid of this Protestant queen. So in 1588, he decides that he's going to invade England, and he is going to take Elizabeth out once and for all. This is a big moment in history. In 1588, Spain goes all in, and they're going to attack England with the most famous invasion fleet known as the Spanish Armada. And I mean, it doesn't look good for England. I mean, Spain at the time was the most powerful country in the world, and they're going to take Elizabeth out. The British, the English defended themselves. Their ships were smaller and faster, so they could hit and run, they could attack and withdraw. They would try to break up the Spanish formations with fire ships. The British had very good leadership during that period. And the British also had a lot of help from the weather. So the combination of these factors basically resulted in the destruction of the Spanish Armada. The Spanish Armada never reached England. They were destroyed at sea. It's one of those ultimate moments in history. If Spain wins in 1588, I don't think any of us would be here right now. I think the whole history of the world would be different, because England would not have survived in its form to go on and establish the colonies that they did, which later would become the United States. So it's sort of, and historians love these fantasy games of, well, what if Abraham Lincoln had lived? What if the Spanish Armada had beaten the British? What if Columbus had kept sailing and reached the continent? I mean, we don't know. What I can tell you is that if England loses this in 1588, the whole history of planet Earth, I think, would be different. It's one of those big moments. What if the Germans had won World War II, God forbid? So if 1588 and the defeat of the Spanish Armada is a big event. I will share with you that I'm a big fan of England's Queen Elizabeth. I like her a lot. I respect strong women, and I particularly respect her because she was a strong woman in a male-dominated world, and she ended up being smarter than all of them. And my favorite moment is when the threat of the invasion of the Armada is very real, and she is advised to basically leave London and go into hiding until the danger has passed. And she's like, nope, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be with the troops. And if they are destroyed, then I'll be destroyed with them. But I'm not going to hide. I'm a leader. And there's this moment where, she addresses her soldiers, and she dresses up in armor, and she says to the men, she says, whatever happens, I'm going to live or die with you. And she says, I know I'm a woman, but, I have the heart and stomach of a king. And she gives this rousing speech, and the men just went wild, and she demonstrated her courage and leadership. It's one of those moments. History teachers also have these weird fantasies of wanting to be a witness to certain moments in history. I would love to have seen that. So I really like her a lot, Queen Elizabeth. She's known as the Virgin Queen, which is why when the Jamestown colony expanded and became known as Greater Virginia, Now it's the state of Virginia, but the colony of Virginia was named in honor of the Virgin Queen, Queen Elizabeth. And many of Jamestown is named after King James. You may have heard of an American city called Charleston. Well, it used to be Charlestown after King Charles. Georgia, named after King George. The French established Louisiana. So, there's evidence of this. Raleigh, there's a city, Raleigh, after Sir Walter Raleigh. New York is, where's Old York? Old York is in England. Many of the names are evidence of this period, even today. Baltimore, Maryland is named after Lord Baltimore of the Calvert family. I don't know. I'm interested in this stuff. I find it fascinating. So we got Henry VIII. We have Queen Elizabeth. The British, when they tried to establish their colonial empire, they weren't going to pick up the tab for this. They were going to basically, if I'm the King of England, if I'm King James, and Devon, you come to me and say, hey, Your Majesty, I'd really like to establish a community in your honor in the New World, a colony in the New World. I'm basically going to say, okay, go for it. I'm glad. I'm not going to pay for it, but knock yourself out. Go ahead, do it. You have my blessing. And the British, you had to get, I call it a royal permission slip. You had to go to the king and get permission to do it, and you could say, I'm going to do this in your name, but they weren't going to pay for it. In the case of the Jamestown colony, this was done as a business deal. They had private investors who were going to pick up the tab for that expedition. The Jamestown colony was established in 1607, but a year earlier, 1606, the Virginia Company of London was formed, and they sold shares to investors to finance this. And they thought, they were going to go over to the New World, and they were just going to get rich. And there were stories, of course, of the Spanish. The Spanish were, returning from the New World to Spain with ships filled with gold. And the British, I think, had this fantasy that, the New World was a place where gold, grew on trees or something. The reality turned out to be quite different. I would like you to be aware of the lost colony of Roanoke. In 1587, this colony was planted, and it lost contact with England. The English were not able to resupply Roanoke the following year, 1588, because of the invasion of the attempted invasion of the Spanish Armada. So it wasn't until 1590 that the English made it back to Roanoke, and they found everybody gone and no trace. And it's sort of one of the great mysteries of, what happened to the lost colony of Roanoke. I have my own theory. I think that they probably got into a conflict with Native Americans who didn't want them there. And they probably scattered or tried to move elsewhere, and were just sort of lost to history. I don't know whether it was the 1920s or 30s, there was this stone that was found, and it was carved. The wording was carved in Old English, and it's called the Dare Stone, named after Virginia Dare, who was one of the Roanoke colonists. And it describes a battle, and it describes, members of her family being killed, and that the survivors had to try to escape. And she describes people who were killed and where they're buried. And for a while, this stone was sort of dismissed as a fake, because other stones were discovered allegedly later that were found to be fake. So then people assume that the original might have been a fake too, but I don't think it is. I think I have a very strong feeling it's legit. But to this day, no one knows really what happened, but it makes sense to me. And another reason I believe that is that Even when the Jamestown colony was established, now you're going Roanoke 1587, Jamestown is 1607. But I mean, even the Jamestown colonists, I mean, they had a lot of problems with the local Powhatan Indians, and they were almost annihilated themselves. So it would not surprise me in the least if the Roanoke colony ended up in a confrontation with natives, and they were basically members of their colony were killed and the survivors forced to flee. Or maybe, you know, they were taken prisoner by Spanish ships. I mean, who knows? But it's one of the great mysteries. And it's connected to the Spanish Armada story in a way, because one of the reasons why this colony was basically left on its own for several years is that the colony was established in 1587, but in 1588 was the big battle against the Armada of Spain. So they were unable, the English were unable to resupply the colony and check on their progress. If they had, then again, history could be very different. So there's a lot going on here, and it's a lot of information to absorb. The first colony to actually survive at all is Jamestown in 1607, named after King James, of course. And there's quite a story with this. They themselves found themselves in confrontation with the local Powhatan Indians. At one point, by the time they get to 1609, the conflict is so bad they can't really leave and go beyond the walls of what Jamestown basically became a fort, really, more than anything else. And if they were to step foot outside that fort, they're dead. It got so bad that by the time the winter was over, the winter of 1609 to 1610, only 60 of the colonists were left alive. And we now know that there were rumors of it, but we now know that cannibalism took place. So since we're approaching lunchtime, I think this might be an appropriate time for me to show you a little video clip here, which may really increase your appetite for history. This is a story you can really sink your teeth into. It's a very tasty story with a lot of historical flavor. Maybe I'll get ribs for lunch today. Sorry, my humor's terrible. I apologize. Here you go.
Scientists have found the strongest evidence yet that the colonists living in Jamestown, Virginia, may have resorted to cannibalism. Times were tough in Jamestown in 1609 and 1610. If you can imagine, winter was coming, and supplies from England that were supposed to bring food and other materials never made it there. And relations with the local Powhatan Indians had gotten so bad that the few hundred settlers were actually hunkered down under a siege-like situation in the fort. People have written that things got so bad that the settlers may have resorted to cannibalism. Researchers digging through a pile of debris in Jamestown found bones that really took them by surprise. There was 2/3 of a skull and part of a leg bone that belonged to what they believe was a 14-year-old girl. And the reason the skull surprised them was that it had some very unique marks on them. But how do you even know that cannibalism happened when you're looking at bones that are several hundred years old? Well, it helps if you're a forensic anthropologist, like Douglas Owsley, who works at the Smithsonian Institution and was involved in interpreting the bones. What he saw was a skull that looked like nothing he had seen before. It had multiple knife marks and several large gashes to the front and back of the head that he believes were caused by either a cleaver or a lightweight hatchet. He also says there were signs that a sharp instrument was used to puncture part of the skull and pry it open. He told me that he believes that the 14-year-old girl was already dead when this occurred, because he also works with victims of modern day crime. And he says that if she had been alive when this happened, that there would be a different pattern of marks on the bone. And even apart from the physical scars on the bones, he says that they can tell a fascinating story about this girl and where she came from. For example, doing chemical analysis, he can tell that she was likely recently from England because she didn't show signs of having eaten the primarily corn-based diet that was so prevalent in the colonies at the time. She also had high levels of nitrogen in her bones, and that indicates she may have been well off in England and had access to eating a lot of meat and protein. He's also doing additional tests to confirm this. There are no written records of Jane's presence in Jamestown, but her bones are telling a very interesting story about an important, if gruesome, period in our history.
Is that crazy or what? And I wanted to just show you a little San Diego connection to this. Before the pandemic, I would offer my students extra credit. There used to be, they called it the Museum of Man in Balboa Park. Now they've changed it. They call it the Museum of Us. So it is more gender inclusive. But let me show you something here that you might find interesting. They have an exhibit on cannibalism, and if you look at the exhibit, let's see if they show it here. Where is she? They had a copy of the skull from the victim of Jamestown, Jane, they called her, and I don't see it here. All right, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's not there any longer, but they had an exhibit there with, I don't believe it was the original skull, but it was a copy. And it talked about her and the discovery of the skull at Jamestown. And one of the things that I do like about history is that even when we think we know something, new discoveries can be made which show us something else. I mean, think about how DNA testing and analysis has enabled us to understand, for example, say human migration patterns and things like that. There were rumors of this cannibalism at Jamestown, but there was never like any definitive proof. And then there was an archaeological dig, and then they found the remains, and so it's pretty cool. I have one more video clip I want to show you, so bear with me here.
In the summer of 1609, a fleet of English ships sails across the Atlantic, bound for the American colony in Jamestown, Virginia. A young girl is among the hundreds of passengers, a girl whose real name may never be known.
The young girl is aboard, and this is part of the biggest fleet to have left England for Virginia. It carried over 500 settlers, 9 ships. Jamestown had been founded 2 years earlier, but had not prospered. And in fact, the first couple of years of Jamestown's history is pretty much a colossal failure.
Jamestown is doomed from the start. The colonists settle on a marshy island with no fresh water, where crops fail and malaria flourishes. Of the first 104 settlers who come to Jamestown, all men, only 38 survive even the first 7 months. The next year, fire nearly destroys the entire settlement. The English had tried to settle America before with little luck. A colony was seen as a place where a person went to die.
This was really a tough place. To establish this colony was difficult and dangerous.
Most colonies failed. Most colonies were lost colonies. And they usually failed within the first 12 months for a variety of reasons. Extreme weather, lack of supplies, Indian attacks.
2 years after its founding, the desperate colony of Jamestown still cannot feed itself. Already, this is the 3rd expedition sent to Virginia. a third emergency rescue mission. Perhaps this time, Jamestown will be saved.
So the young girl is part of this great effort to re-establish the colony. And there was a grand vision for an English New World, an English America, that would in time rival the great Spanish Empire to the south. This fleet carried the hopes of the nation, and she went with those hopes too.
So there's a lot more to this. I could show you more video clips and talk about this endlessly. It's a fascinating story. I've never quite understood why people say that history is boring. I don't think there's anything boring about it. It's got everything. It has war, it has survival, life and death, and I mean, you've got the story, for example, of Captain John Smith, who was, taken prisoner by the chief of the Powhatan, and his life may have been at risk. And then you have the story of Pocahontas, who Captain Smith later claimed saved his life, and then later she becomes a prisoner of the English, and then she marries another Englishman named John Rolfe, and they have a baby, and she goes to England, where she becomes, in a way, sort of like a celebrity. And then she's very young, and then she gets sick and dies. And I mean, you don't have to make any of this up. I mean, the drama is there. It's very, I don't know, I think it's very interesting. I don't understand why people say history is boring. I don't think there's anything boring about it at all. If you take the time to read the stories, they're good stories. Interesting stories. I mean, like that story I told you about Cortez. I mean, who could even make that up? It's so, fantastical. So what I'm going to do in the time that remains is I'm going to set it up so that students who have questions can unmute themselves. And if you don't have any questions, then you're free to go. Please work on your assignment and do it the right way. And I'll stop the recording.